Hi, this is David Strohmeyer, and welcome to a behind-the-scenes look at the reconstruction of Cinerama's Russian Adventure. This 1966 compilation film was created during the Cold War as a travelogue of the Soviet Union, using footage extracted from several Russian-produced three-panel kinopanorama films, originally called Cinepanorama. The Russians were obviously aware of the popularity of Cinerama early on, especially after Cinerama won major prizes at some trade fairs in the mid-1950s. As a reaction to Cinerama's success, the Russian film industry created a similar and completely compatible three-panel curved screen process of their own. Several years later, veteran film producer Hal Dennis, along with the help from several important people at the U.S. State Department, believed that a Russian travelogue project would be a good way to help diffuse the Cold War a bit and bring people together for better cultural understanding. After its 1966 roadshow release, the film essentially disappeared and was believed to be a lost film, until 2010, when the Academy Film Archive was tipped off about a batch of film cans located in an abandoned Hollywood storage unit. The 65mm composite negative of Russian Adventure was part of that find. This composite element, all three panels joined within one frame, is the element I telecinied at Crest Digital and then digitally cleaned up to present at the 60th anniversary celebration at the Dome in 2012. Fortunately, a usable 6-channel soundtrack was located at the National Media Museum in Bradford, England, and digitized at Todd A.O. Studios. At that 60th celebration, the Hal Dennis family came forward and informed me that original three-panel duplicate elements and inner positives did in fact exist and could be used for any future restoration needs. When released in 1966, most Cinerama theaters no longer had three-panel projection setup, so most people who saw this film simply saw the 70mm print down of the three-panel duplicate originals. The exception was the McVickers Cinerama in Chicago, where the only three-panel print created was shown for many weeks in its full glory. Now, with this new current reconstruction coming from three-panel 6-perf elements, you will be able to see what audiences saw at the actual three-panel presentation at McVickers. And as you can see, the picture quality of the 70mm was reasonably acceptable, but did not quite match the clarity and sharper look of some of our other Flicker Alley Cinerama titles, most of which originated from three-panel elements. Here is a split-screen comparison of the 65mm image on the bottom and the recent three-panel scan restoration on the top. There is much better film grain structure and less cropping, even though these elements are actually duplicate negatives, and is a generation away, having been struck from the original Soviet camera negatives for this title. Let's take a look side by side of the center panel for a better idea. The massive amount of 6-perf materials provided by the Dennis estate was over 88 cans of film. This was inventoried and organized properly for the scanning process, then carefully inspected for any structural problems we might encounter. So after a private grant was secured to facilitate this new restoration, the scanning process proceeded at Photochem in Burbank in August of 2015 and was completed by October. The 65mm version was now simply used as a template to reconstruct the film from the three-panel superior elements. During our 2K scanning of each individual panel, we could see some of the coming problems with the age of these elements. Meanwhile, a detailed inventory of each three-panel widescreen composite of the project was created to help keep track of the 663 total shots or edits in the film, as well as some of the processes and treatments that we would need to use on each shot. So if you were thinking in three-panel terms, that's 3 times 660 edits. But first, let's show you how the basic workflow of an average shot happens. Here is a raw scan of a B-panel barrel warp shot from one of the ballet scenes. Barrel warping corrects for any distortion when a 27mm Cinerama-like wide-angle lens is used. Some scenes in this film were shot with longer lenses and did not need this correction. Let's add the A panel scan, and then the C scan, for a look at all three together. One of the innovations the Russians came up with was a notch in the camera aperture to help designate the three panels. One notch for the A camera, 2 notches for the B, and 3 for the C panel. This helps to keep everything organized and prevent panel mix-ups. Now let's take a look at the overlap real estate we have available on this shot for the panel lacing procedure. You can see the duplicate image of the trumpets between B and C, and also the young lady standing near the right edge of the A panel, and she's also on the left edge of the B. Now let's join up these 3 panels until we have a match. Let's take a closer look, as often I need to blow up the area to hone in a more accurate match. Here I am lining up the trumpets, and we slowly get it into position and lock it in. Now let's line up the lady's face as well as her costume and lock that in. Now we move the shot into a 16:9 slightly squeezed full frame format to perform the rest of the work, such as the color and density corrections, as well as any needed dirt cleanup or other anomalies. Now here is the final smile box image as it appears in the restored film. There were several areas where the alignments were nearly impossible to match up well. One of these scenes was the skiing sequence. It appeared that the camera was somehow out of alignment, perhaps due to the excessive vibration, and that longer lenses were used. Not much seemed to work to improve it. Even the color and excessive flicker across the widescreen seemed to be problematic, and there was some vignetting between the panels as well. The best solution to minimize the defects was a mixture of heavy flicker removal, some garbage mats for the sky, color work, and a few other tricks to minimize and disguise the problems. Now let's take a look at the smile box sequence as it appears in the final film. One of the problems that kept reoccurring in the circus sequence was a density and exposure problem on the right side of the screen. This was in about 25% of the circus sequence. You can see that there is less density and contrast on the right side. This could be in the original, or perhaps was created somehow when the duplicate elements were struck from the Soviet negatives. We're just not sure. The remedy for this was to create a gradient garbage mat on the right side, which you see here, and then super it over the color-corrected shot, evening out the problem. Here is the final smile box shot with this correction. Another major concern was the excessive and annoying vignetting, or darker areas at the edges of each panel. This occurred in several major scenes. One of these was the underwater sequence. It could be in the original photography, or perhaps turned up somehow when the duplicate negatives were created. In either case, we wanted to try and minimize this. Tom March, a former Canadian broadcast engineer who has helped produce some of our past restorations, believed he could help with this anomaly. So I sent him about 75 shots from the show to see what magic he could perform. After a few days of experiments, he tailored several versions of garbage mats that, when applied and adjusted for each shot, helped the problem immensely. Here again is the shot before treatment, And then here is a side-by-side of some shots with Tom's vignetting corrections. Vintage film has a tendency to pick up flickering as it ages, and Russian Adventure was certainly no exception. And when you have three separate panels, side by side, fading or flickering at different rates, the problem is visually compounded. Fortunately, there is some software that can correct for most of this annoying artifact. Let's look at the correction side by side. On the right, we have applied Boris Flicker Fixer, with it set on temporal smoothing. That helped a lot, but with the addition of Digital Anarchy's flicker-free plugin set for archival footage and to detect motion, we have an even better result. Duplicate elements created from original negatives have a tendency to pick up more dirt and artifacts, whether from handling over the years, and in some cases even printed into the dupe. 3-panel widescreen frames compound this problem due to the fact that there are 3 separate images being handled. As you can see, there's a lot of white specks, especially noticeable when there is a dark background. This is where our Furnace Core plugin comes in handy, as it searches out about 95% of these artifacts and replaces this dirt with cleaner sections of corresponding frames. Due to the excessive amount of dirt, both large and minute, the entire film was treated with Furnace Core for a much cleaner image. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at a very difficult restoration and reconstruction. It took us several months longer than predicted, but originating from 3-panel Sauve color duplicate elements, however problematic, hopefully gives the film the same look it originally had at Chicago's McVickers Cinerama for audiences back in 1966. This is David Strohmeyer. Thanks for watching.